You might think that you're coming to this call and I'm about to pitch the heck out of you, and I just want you to know that that's not going to happen. So you may buy yourself some goodwill, but then what happens? You pitch them. You burn all of that goodwill. It's like, what the heck, man?
I think you go beyond burning goodwill. You just lied. What is up, everybody? Today's episode is a little bit different because I'm excited to tell you about a workshop that Jewel and myself and Carlos Garcia are doing October 12th in Miami, a full-day workshop. And the second one is in London. It's a 2-day workshop that's October 29th and 30th. Here's the analogy I want to make for you. You don't read a book on how to play baseball. You just go out and play baseball. And then in the swings and the practice, coaches will make little adjustments for you and you'll see your game improve. You don't read a book on how to play tennis. You just go out on the court and you hit lots of balls. And so we're expecting ourselves to read a book on sales, to watch videos, or to do role plays that are 10, 15 minutes long at best. And we think we're going to have this transformative moment. Now, a lot of you do achieve this regardless of how you consume the information. But the best way that you learn how to do something is just to do it. And the only way I know how to do that, aside from wasting potential business opportunities, is to go to a workshop where you can get that individual attention from coaches who care about your success. And we're going to give you a little preview of the kinds of things we're going to talk about. And we have no structure for this conversation, but we know this is an important discussion to have because you work so hard to get your leads. They finally get on the call, on a Zoom call or meeting face to face, and you fumble the bag, as they say. You're full of anxiety. You don't know what to say. You're stuck on certain scripts. And then afterwards, you're kind of just kicking yourself in the butt, like, why didn't I say that? Or why did I say that? It's either what you said or what you didn't say. And it's a lot of pressure, especially when you think how rare it is for you to have an opportunity to sit or speak in front of a live client who has money, who needs services, who needs your help. So all you have to do is show up. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Oh man, that last part of what you said, I felt the pain. I was like, yeah, it's not like I get leads coming in every single week. And I do feel that pain, like even now I'm cringing. It's like when you don't have leads coming in every single day or maybe not even every week, it feels like the chances at bat are few and far between. So then that's where it gets pretty hard to not come at these calls with that like sense of desperation. You know, I've had so many people just like you say, I have to make this work. And I'm like, oh no, you're already starting off on the wrong foot, man.
Right. Well, let's address that first, because perhaps you're listening to this podcast and you have no idea that I used to run a production company for 20 plus years where I sold creative services, and you have to learn how to sell. Otherwise you go broke and you starve. And so I want to talk about that a little bit and how this process shaped the way that I think, my philosophy, my approach, my tone. And so to give you some context, okay? So 1995, I'm out of school, I graduated Art Center, and I start my business foolishly, probably a lot sooner than I should have. I guess I was filled with a lot of confidence, moxie, and determination, borderline arrogance to think I have a good portfolio. People should just hire me. It shouldn't be any effort because we were told in school, if your work is good enough, people will just give you work. You don't have to learn how to sell. And that's a pile of crap. Let me just tell you that right now. It is important that your work is good, but being good is just a cost of entry. You don't get to play in the game if your work isn't good. Let's just accept that good gets you in, but good doesn't help you to win. Okay? Say it one more time. Good gets you in, but good isn't what gets you the win. Luckily for me, I was at the right time in the right place that I got a lot of at-bats. I got a lot of opportunities to swing that bat. Now, most of you aren't in that situation. You're in the league, which is cool because your work is good enough. You're in the majors, but you're a bench. You're not even the starting lineup. It's not until somebody gets hurt or they feel like a need to change strategies or it's late in the inning and they have no hope, they put you in and you get a swing or two. But when you are so infrequent at your at-bats, your practice, that every time you go up to take another swing, it's like you're starting from zero again. You can't remember what you're supposed to do. And so you're just fumbling all the time. This is true in almost everything that you do that's difficult. For me, that was like public speaking. If I was only booked every 3, 6, 9 months, I was so rusty in between, I might as well just be starting over. It wasn't until I started accepting public speaking gigs on the regular that I actually developed a system. I got really good, I got confident, and those butterflies, they're still there, but they're very small butterflies now. And in fact, it's not as draining to me as it used to be. So when you're, in my case, getting probably 3 to 5 new business calls every single week for projects ranging from, on the low end, $50,000, and on the high end, probably $350,000. And so it's learned through repeated attempts at taking swings at something, being in front of new clients, trying new ideas, and then refining the process with the addition of a business coach who was the thing that I needed to get to that breakthrough moment. So I just want to put that out there. so that people understand that context. My confidence, my ability to speak to clients, my ease comes from hundreds of pitches that I've done over the course of my career. Just putting that out there so you all know.
You know, Chris, I'm really glad you shared this because I think I've told you more than once. People will watch what you're doing. They'll watch your videos. They'll listen to you and your LinkedIn calls. And they're probably having the same reaction that I had to you 3 years ago, where I was just like, how is he doing that? It's like I'm watching a magic trick. And now, fast forward for me 3 years later, I'm like, I get it. I get it. It took a lot of studying what you were doing, a lot of studying of coaching as well on my part since I'm a coach. And suddenly it's not so inconceivable. There's still certain things you do that I find magical. Like, don't get me wrong. Even like the tone of voice you use, I'm like, holy moly, how is that guy doing this? You're able to say certain things with such warmth. And I'm like, God, it feels like being wrapped in a warm blanket. It's just so annoying. You're just too good. But I think what a lot of us are sitting out there in the audience thinking, Chris can do it, but I can't. Other people can do it, but I can't. And that's kind of the purpose of the call, because I don't think I hear you share your story enough. The first 2 years of you running blind, how much money did you lose?
For clarification, Blind is the name of the company, because one could listen to this and say you're running blind, like dumb, deaf, and blind. Actually, the company name is Blind Inc. Okay, so just let everybody know. I was probably doing both, literally and figuratively, running blind. Here's the sad part. Because I hadn't worked in a capacity where I could watch other salespeople or upper management creative directors talk to clients, I had no idea what you're supposed to say. It's like somebody described this to me. Like, imagine playing chess, but you don't know the rules and you're blindfolded. That's what the sales game feels like. You think you're making moves, but you're actually committing probably career or financial suicide in the way that you move. So the first part is take off the blindfold so you can see what's going on and then learn the rules of the game. And I didn't have any of that. So I was just fumbling and bumbling through calls left and right. I don't know to this day, looking back, how I even got on some of these calls, because those days we didn't have a sales rep. I don't even know how people found out about us, but I don't know if you know, but there's an agency called Shy at Day. They do the advertising for Apple, and they've been doing it for decades now. The executive creative director, Chris Graves, calls us up along with his team for a job for Nissan. Now, this is a big deal because car companies are well-funded, and the work that you're going to do is going to be seen by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people. So there was a lot riding on this call. And so once the clients finished talking about what they wanted, I was just like a deer in the headlights. I didn't even know what to say. I'm going to be fully transparent. I just said, cool, good idea. And I'm sure they're like, who the fudge scheduled a call with this idiot? Because the call quickly wrapped up. I think for self-preservation, I blanked out the rest of this. But I think that was like an $85,000 animated end tag thing that could have led to hundreds of thousands of dollars of more work. That's how this works. So opportunity after opportunity for Sun Microsystems, for Janus Funds, for I'm spacing on some of these other companies, we would pitch and just routinely lose. And these were pitches where the jobs were real. These aren't like speculative projects. They were going to award it to one of 5 people they're talking to. And so by my estimation, on the conservative side, I think we left over $1 million of new business on the table just in the initial phase, because as you know, when you work with someone, they tend to hire you over and over again. As an example, we worked with Deutsch LA. We did the regional Mitsubishi Motors spots. And that was, I think, like $40,000 or $50,000. And that one opportunity led to their national work, which led to us working on almost all of the accounts, leading to millions of dollars. So when I say an estimate, we probably lost over $1 million in new business. That's just the initial wave. If I think about the second and third wave to this, it's probably $5 to $6 million of new business that we just lost. And it was heartbreaking. It was demoralizing, because I kept looking at my team, mostly my friends, and I kept asking ourselves, like, what are we doing wrong? How come we can't win these pitches? And I felt really bad because I was thinking, I guess I'm just not good enough.
Oh man, that hit me so hard, because that's another thing I've had people tell me in the DMs is when you don't get enough yeses in a row, you start to question your self-worth. You start to think, oh, maybe I'm an imposter. Maybe I'm not so good at this, like any of this job. And that's where we start to build like what I call a false connection. It's like, what has you think that your ability to show up on the sales call has anything to do with your ability to be a designer or to do branding. It's like the only thing that tells me is you suck at showing up on the sales call. There's something happening there. So if you look back over these calls, what would you say is the number one mistake or the number one thing you didn't get back then?
I think the biggest thing that I didn't get that time, Jewel, was I didn't understand that I'm supposed to ask the clients questions about what they wanted. I just took it at face value. Whatever it is they said was literally what they wanted. And I was supposed to magically understand those words without further dialogue. I also made the mistake, and this is a big one, of once they stopped talking, it was my turn to pitch ideas. So this means that what would typically happen is the agency would send you a script. They'd fax over. Back then, they would fax it over to you. Did you get the boards? And you would read through the script. You would highlight with your marker, make notes, figure out what kind of questions you wanted to ask. And then you started to think about ideas. And this was a very dangerous thing because when they were talking, walking us through the script, I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about it's almost my turn to talk and my heart is racing and just pounding out of my chest. It was like, oh my God, it's almost my turn. It feels like we're nearing the end of what they're saying and now I have to figure out what to say. So I had a couple options. Asked a couple of pre-scripted questions, which in hindsight was really stupid because they had said things on the call that were more important, more relevant to what they were thinking about than any stupid question I was going to come up with by just looking at the printed material. Yes, I did need to read the script so I can familiarize myself with it, but arriving at the call with so many preconceived ideas and half-baked questions, or even fully baked questions, did not allow me to listen. So oftentimes I was juggling, what am I hearing? What do I want to ask? Oh, that was important, but I need to ask this question. And so oftentimes I'd have to go retrace what was said with the question I had intended to ask to say, did they ask it or did they already answer this? Because it would sound really stupid if I asked the same question that they had already said. And this was problematic. So my brain was split into like multiple layers. And here's the third worst part. After asking those questions, which then they answered, I wasn't even listening to those answers to my own questions because I was thinking, I have ideas I'm supposed to pitch. And I thought that's how you're supposed to do this. So as soon as I stopped asking questions, then came this awkward transition from asking to, well, so here's my vision for what we're going to do. And people are very polite on these calls because they know they didn't pay you. You put in your own time and energy to come up with some ideas. And because that was the case, they never gave you real feedback. So I was like, okay. They're kind of tepid in their response, but it wasn't like, this is the dumbest thing ever. They didn't ever correct you on your ideas. They just knew, I think what was happening, as I imagined in my mind, they took a marker and they just crossed your name off that list of 5 people. I could almost hear the Sharpie shh as my name was scraped off. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm not getting this gig. I already know it. And so I toiled in that kind of losing job after losing job, the state of depression, it's demoralizing, and just trying to pick myself up by saying, well, at least you were invited to the party. Because who we were pitching against were industry standards. The teams that were pitching were bigger than our entire company put together. So I would console myself at night and say, yeah, at least we're invited. You know, it's cool to be somewhat relevant. That's the best I could make out of a bad situation.
The first part where you said you didn't know you could ask questions, or even that really that's the thing to do. But I'm sorry I laughed. But I only laugh because I know I did the same thing in my early on coaching calls. It's like you're so obsessed, even once you get on the track of understanding you're supposed to ask questions, you become obsessed with asking the right questions. So you're not listening because you're like, what's the next question I'm supposed to ask? So then it's like, what's the point of any of this?
Yeah.
And then the other part you said, I know I've heard like a million times. You said you thought when they stopped talking, it was your turn to pitch ideas. You're supposed to pitch. And that is the number one thing I see happening in all of the role plays you and I do together. It's like literally every person, it's like you are out there trying to turn everything into a nail for your hammer, right? Like I think you say all roads lead back to you. Like we just heard somebody the other day say, you were role playing and it was maybe like a book deal. And instead of asking like, what's important about this book deal for you? She replied with, oh yeah, see, that's why you need personal branding.
Right. All roads led right back to personal branding. Coincidentally, the thing that she wants to sell me.
Yeah. Yeah, coincidentally. So I think one of the biggest themes that I've been seeing, like as I've been reflecting, because we just did role plays literally this week, 2 days ago, I think we come into the sales call with this mistaken idea that we're supposed to persuade them that we're supposed to keep saying, hey, that's why you should hire me. Hey, you know what? I do that. Hey, I can do that. And in my mind, when I'm the person as the buyer, I'm sure many people out there would think I'm like a nightmare client or a nightmare buyer, but I promise you, I'm one of those people where I'm probably buying a product every single week, if not more often than that. Like, what's the thing you said to me?
I don't know, but you love buying things. You're addicted to learning, so you spend a lot of money.
I do.
Yeah.
So I'm actually not that hard to sell to. But what I don't tolerate are people who give me no evidence. They show me no proof that they can do what they say they can do. And that's all I keep seeing over and over in our role plays is instead of literally showing me, hey, here's something you might find useful, they're all running the role plays with, yeah, I can do that. Or there's a ton of interrogation. So many questions, and I start to think, where is this going? And did they even hear me? So then the vibe check starts to fail.
You're pointing out a problem here that a lot of people have. We're either stuck between one of 2 points. Number one is we have the script, and we just stick to the script because someone told us we need to have a sales script. So it's more important for you to get through your sales questions than it is for you to listen. So that's a big problem in itself. And I have a general problem with people who have seemingly default phrases that they want to use to persuade you to buy. And it feels really disingenuous. I don't think you're looking out for me, and it doesn't feel authentic. And the other mistake that people have is they go in with no plan. So let's just freestyle this whole thing, and we can just wing it because, Chris told us, be present and ask questions. But you can tell pretty clearly that there's no strategy. They'll just ask question after question. And if I'm listening to this as a coach or just as a bystander, I'm thinking, this is a wild goose chase. I have no idea. The questions aren't leading or scaffolding towards identifying a real problem, a real goal, a need, or a challenge, or even a business outcome. It's just all over the place. So I believe the solution is somewhere in between, where you have some kind of framework where you understand, generally speaking, at this point in the conversation, I need to understand this. And if I understand this, then I can proceed to step 2. If I understand step 2, then I can lead to step 3, but not until I can cover what is supposed to be sorted out for part 1 and part 2. So it's something like that.
Okay, that's a really good point. So we don't want people just asking random questions that lead nowhere. But at the same time, I think unfortunately what we're seeing too much of are leading questions. Would you mind explaining what that is?
Yes, a leading question is one where the question is kind of fake. It's designed to elicit the response that you want to hear. For example, you can say, where would you like to go to eat? That is assuming that you're hungry and that you want to eat with me. There's 2 big assumptions there, right? So I can tell when somebody asks me that question that they're hungry and they want to eat with me. Otherwise, they wouldn't ask. And so we can see that pretty clearly in this kind of example. But when we're in a sales situation, there are many leading questions that you'll ask that you're not even realizing that's the same thing. You can ask a question like, why do you think personal branding will help you? A, I don't know what personal branding is. B, I've never said I wanted personal branding. And C, I think you're trying to sell me something right now. So whenever we do something like that, anybody who's kind of semi-conscious will start to feel negative feelings about you in that moment. And we describe it as, are you building rapport or are you breaking rapport? So rapport is like we're in sync, we're jiving, we see eye to eye, there's a vibe that's going on. And as soon as you ask one of those questions, it pulls me out and it makes me ask, oh, I was caught up in an illusion. I thought you really cared, but in truth, you really don't. In cinema, there's this thing that's happening when you're immersed inside of a movie that you feel what the characters are feeling. So if they're scared, you're scared. If they're excited, then you're excited. And when you can feel and edit, it takes you out of that dreamlike sequence. Movies are described as the closest that you can get to dreaming while your eyes are open. Okay, so it is the editor's job to cut the film in such a way that you don't even realize there are hundreds of cuts being made all the time. We think of it as one continuous sequence. So the illusion is maintained, so we're immersed in the world. In conversation, whether you're out on a date, hang out with a friend, or you're having a meeting with colleagues, when you do something that breaks that, you're doing that hard cut. You're letting everybody know we're in a meeting, we're on a date, and I have an objective. And it's not just to be in your presence. There's something else that's going on. And we're very sensitive to this right now. Like your spider sense will go off. It'll start to tingle like, wait, what's happening here? Oh, I think you want to sell me something. And if you don't know what this feels like, just look through your DMs on social media, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, in your email, your inbox, to see how many of those times where you've read the thing and you know, this is fake. I can already tell. How long is it before they get past throwing gratitude towards you or appreciating what you do as they make a hard transition to, by the way, we've just launched a new product that we think you would love. So everything else that they say before that is completely negated because now your hand has been revealed.
Yeah, this part that I think you're describing, that feeling, first is the disconnect, right? The cut, as you're describing. So as soon as the disconnect happens, you're kind of jarred out of it. And then you start thinking, oh, something else is going on. Now, you may think that you come to the call, the buyer or the prospect comes to the call, and of course, it's like, what is the point of this call? Yeah, I think we know at the end of the day, we are talking to someone like this, a service provider, with perhaps the intent to check them out. And if everything makes sense, it feels good, then perhaps we could proceed to working together. But there's a certain way you can go about this. And unfortunately, I think people are so intent on appearing not salesy, they become deceptive. And so then when that disconnect happens, it's like, oh, as a buyer, I'm like, you have an agenda, also known as an ulterior motive. And then that's the problem. I no longer feel like you care about me. You have my best interests at heart. And of course, I know you want to sell me something. But again, that was kind of the premise of this call, unless like you cloaked it in one of those coffee chats that I get like a million requests for.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunate. You know, so there's something you've taught or you've referenced multiple times, like an accusation audit. And I think even at this point, like an accusation audit of, hey, you might think that you're coming to this call and I'm about to pitch the heck out of you. And I just want you to know that that's not going to happen. So you may buy yourself some goodwill, but then what happens? You pitch them. You burn all of that goodwill. It's like, what the heck, man?
I think you go beyond burning goodwill. You just lied. That's beyond just goodwill. So for example, saying I'll pick you up and showing up late a little bit from picking you up might burning some goodwill. But saying I'll pick you up and going to Disneyland and totally spacing out on you, you just lied. You made a promise and you broke it immediately. And so that's a different thing. So your level of resentment, your feelings about me are going to change drastically if I tell you something and literally just a few minutes later you lie. Because what happens is, and I really believe in this, how you do anything is how you do everything. So when you lied to me on the call, theoretically, this is the best our relationship's ever going to be. We're still in the pre-honeymoon phase. You know, it's courtship right now. And if you're going to lie to me during the courtship, what's going to happen when I give you money and I have no more leverage over you and now you are going to do whatever? So you have to be really aware of this. And this is true in all relationship in life. If you're dating, if you're talking to a prospect, don't begin the relationship on a lie. Because the lie compounds itself because you have to keep lying to maintain the original lie. So somebody asks you a point blank question, and we see this a lot happening because we're in a political cycle right now, is when they ask a candidate a question and they try to avoid it, it just seems like doesn't feel right to us. Like, do you have a plan? I don't have a plan. I'm still working on a plan. Or what are you going to do about this situation? And to say like, I have a plan, this is what it is, and be super direct. And so I think there's something to learn about how we feel about others when they're evasive or when they tell us something that we feel like is not the whole truth. Our feelings towards them goes way down. Now I want to address something because I want you, the listener, to be able to walk away from this conversation more empowered, more confident in your next sales call. So what I'm telling you is this: there is an implicit agreement between buyer and seller to get on a call because buyer has a problem, has money to spend. Seller has a solution and wants to receive the money from the buyer. This is implicit. So to say like, I'm not going to sell you is a strange thing. You don't even need to say that because we're getting a call to see if my problem is something you can fix and if I determine if you're the right person to fix it for me. People are not just jumping on these calls for the hell of it. Very few people have that kind of time, especially the people that you've now categorized as potential clients or buyers of services. The more problems they have, the more urgent that problem is, the more essential it is, the more likely that this is a very important call to them. Okay? So let's just get rid of this whole subterfuge, this deception, this chicanery that we carry, that we're not going to talk about sales today because that's just total BS. A lot of people argue with me on this, and I say, look, if you and I are in a sales room, I'm almost confident I'd clean your clock. I'd wipe the floor with you because of the way you approach it. And the thing they argue with me about is, and listen up everybody, because I know you're listening to this, you want to start the conversation with small talk. That is just you setting up a smoke screen for what you really need to talk about, which is, why are we having this conversation today? What is on your mind? What is the reason that we're on the call? And if you can get to that and find out what the problem is, we've done some good work together already. So we don't need to talk to them about, oh, how's the weather? What's going on in your world? How's your health? It's hot today, isn't it? All that stuff is just delaying and stretching out the conversation from the point of which we need to talk about. Number one rule is respect the person in front of you. And the way you respect them is you honor the time that they've given you. So to me, cut the small talk out. After you've done the business, and if there's extra time and both parties are feeling really warm and friendly towards each other, talk about all the small talk you want. But now you'll have removed the elephant in the room in that there was business to talk about. We've taken care of that. It's kind of like exercising in the morning or eating proper nutrition before you have dessert. You want to do the hard stuff first so that the easy stuff you don't have to feel guilty over.
I agree with what you're saying. Even despite sometimes me opening some of the calls with small talk, it kind of depends on if the other person starts that first. I'm not going to be a robot and be like, no, we're only talking sales. So
Okay.
I think we fall into the trap of wanting to maintain social niceties, but then giving up total control of the call. I've seen so many messages from people saying that their calls last like 2 hours. I'm like, what the heck is going on? You and I, we did a call audit for somebody. He turned in a transcript and a recording that was 90 minutes long, and it wasn't even the full call. And I was just like, holy smokes, this call could have been cut in half easily, and you would have lost nothing in the first 45 minutes. So it's an issue, I think, with the whole honoring their time. But I also think it's a balance, because I recently did a role play with someone, and I found the person said, I think at least 3 times, where I want to respect your time. And so we're not aware, I think, that when we keep saying the same thing over and over, it comes off disingenuous. And so, of course, I want to work with someone who respects my time. But the fact that they keep saying it makes me question them at that point. So there are little things like all along the road, these little blips.
Yeah. Well, Jewel, why don't we do this? I want you to prove me wrong right now. Why don't we pretend, slip into role play when there's new business, I'm the seller, you're the buyer, and you start off with a kind of social pleasantry, social nicety, if you will. And let me see how I would respond to that. Okay. So this is not scripted, everybody. I have no idea what Jewel's going to say, and Jewel doesn't even know what she's going to say until right now. And so let's see how this would go and see if she feels, after we have this little part, how she feels. So play along, everybody. Just pretend like you're one of the two of us, like either you're the buyer or the seller. And in this case, I'm the seller and Jewel's the buyer.
All right. You ready?
I think I'm ready.
All right. Oh my God, Chris, I'm such a huge fan. I've been following your YouTube channel for 8 years, and I loved that last video you did.
Wow, that's super flattering. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Just out of curiosity, what was that last video you were referring to?
It's the video where you were talking about imposter syndrome. I feel a lot of imposter syndrome, and the way you said that, it hit me. Like, I watched that video like 3 times. Man, how do you come up with these ideas?
So is that video related to the reason why we're having this call today, Jewel?
Oh, well, I guess in a way you could say that, I find myself looking for some business coaching, and I feel like I have some imposter syndrome.
Okay. I'd like to ask for your permission to run the agenda for this call. I find that when I do, we can cover a lot of ground together, not waste a lot of each other's time. And then, time permitting and you willing, we can talk about whatever the heck you want. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so the first thing I like to do is time box this conversation. And I don't want to feel rushed at the end, not knowing when you have to leave. So we've scheduled 30 minutes to talk together today. Is that still the case?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, and if we need a little bit more time, is there flexibility or is it a hard out at 30?
There's a hard out.
Okay, perfect. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a few questions. And if I feel like we're straying a little bit from what I need to know to help you, then I'm going to ask for your permission to kind of just cut in. Is that okay?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. I noticed some hesitation there. Do you have some reservations about me cutting you off?
I don't think so. I think now I'm starting to worry that I might ramble too much.
Okay. Don't worry. I wouldn't consider it rambling. I just think a lot of times clients have so much that they want to share that in doing so, to try to like fill in the complete picture, it's actually for somebody like me, it'll fry my circuits, if you will. My circuits will short out. But I know in previous cases with the hundreds of clients I've talked to in the past, oftentimes if you just follow my lead, we're going to actually cover a lot of ground. You're going to learn a lot about what it is that you want and potentially the things that stand in your way. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Okay, fantastic. End scene. Okay. Now, Jewel, I fully gave you permission to dissect that 1,000 different ways. I'm sure you will. Let me know how you're feeling. Talk about what you responded to, or what you didn't respond to, or if anything that I unintentionally missed in our conversation.
Fudge, man, this might be one of the times where I have nothing to offer you here in terms of what I would change. The first point that I noticed is when, I was being the overly excited fan, which I know you get all the time. And when I said imposter syndrome and that I've watched this video, you're like, what video? And I was like, perfect. And then when I kept going on and I asked you, hey, how did you come up with these ideas? The pivot, it was so good. You were like, is that related to why you're on the call today? And I was like, oh, shizzles, that was so good. I'm taking notes right here. And then asking permission to time box the conversation, double checking whether we still have the 30 minutes. Is that a hard stop or can we go over a little bit? That was perfect. Because I think a lot of times what happens with people is they don't ever do those checks, right? Like they look at the time and then even when time approaches, you've got 5 minutes left. They still don't say anything. Hey, we've only got 5 minutes left. Are we still good on time or do you have to go?
Yeah.
But the fact that you asked about it from the get-go is so much better because now you know this is how much time you actually have. So let's use it wisely. The other point where, of course, I threw this in a little intentionally with well, gosh, I don't want to ramble. Like maybe I'm too much, which I also hear a ton from the creatives. You were really good. First, you dispelled the notion that I'm rambling. You were like, I wouldn't call it rambling. This is just what it is. And I like to keep things time boxed. And then you said it's for your own benefit because your circuits get fried. So that takes the load off of me from feeling like I'm too much or I'm somehow, like extra. So that was really good. And I'm like, gosh, that was expert, right? Like we don't want people to say, you do this, you do this. It's, I feel this. It's because I get like this. And then you're not blaming or accusing the other people, which we unfortunately see in a lot of our role plays. And then the last thing, you picked up on my hesitation. You're like, is that okay if I sometimes cut in? And I was like, oh, I guess so. And you're like, what's going on there? So seriously, man, I got nothing to change because that was so good.
Well, thank you. Thanks for playing along with me. Now, I'm going to tell our audience here some of the strategic things that I was doing, okay? Because my mind is like a little mini computer. I'm like, input, output, and I'm just figuring things out. The first thing that you said was, oh, I'm a fan, and I was watching this video on imposter syndrome. Let me break that part down. When someone is gushing about you, you need to learn how to accept a compliment. Like, oh my God, that's so flattering. Because otherwise, a lot of us aren't comfortable with receiving compliments. And so we sweep it under the rug. So the other person's like, huh? I wonder if you heard what I said. Because you express yourself in a moment of vulnerability by saying, I'm a fan. It's not easy for people to say that. So to not to acknowledge that for them, either one, they're going to feel really bad or embarrassed. Or number two, they're going to feel like they need to say it again so you can hear it. Notice like when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're getting into an argument, the first time you say it, it's like really pleasant. The person doesn't respond. And I'm guilty of this in my real life. So honey, if you're listening, I'm sorry. Then she'll amp up the volume and the veracity of what she's saying to a point in which I'm like, oh my God, you just dropped a nuclear bomb on my head. I was just like watching TV. What happened? She doesn't know it, but what's happened is she said it 4 different ways to get it through my thick skull, but I couldn't hear it. So she's going to have to escalate.
I'm going to hold myself back and not ask for like specific examples, but I'm so dying to know some of these, she said it 4 different ways.
Yeah, we'll have to punt that for another call, right?
Oh
for
my God.
An episode of Unfiltered.
Yeah. But in this context, when someone offers you a compliment, I think what we don't realize is so many of us come from cultures of having been raised to be quote unquote humble, which
Yes.
I'm like, unfortunately, your idea of humble is probably off. And so we have this automatic habit of downplaying or even rejecting or dismissing what they just said. We don't realize they've just offered us a gift. So imagine if you were to physically offer someone a gift and they just swatted it out of your hands. How would you feel?
Disrespected is how I would feel.
Yeah.
Like, fine. Last time I gave you a gift. And that's not
Yeah.
a way we want to hold our relationships.
No.
The next thing you said was, I was just watching one of your videos on imposter syndrome. I'm pretty sure I know which one you're talking about, but that is not how I want to operate. So I'll ask you which one. And so again, this is demonstrating one of the 8 elemental skills of conversational selling, which will go much more in depth during the workshops, is evidence-based follow-up. So I feel like you, the client, are expressing things that are really important to you. And I want to demonstrate full value listening. So every little thing that you say, I'm a fan, you're gushing, a video about imposter syndrome that you watched recently. So you've given me 2 juicy pieces of information. 1, quickly acknowledged. Number 2, which one was that? Now, what's happening here, and you can tell me it was different in your mind, Jewel, is all of a sudden you're, whoa, I need to be a little bit more intentional on how I'm communicating because Chris is going to pick up on everything that I say. So now you're like, okay, it was this video? And then the follow-up question was, is this the reason why we're having a call today? Is any relation to that? Because otherwise you're going to, this is subconsciously, start to edit out things that are not relevant. Because you're going to realize really quickly, Chris is really listening. So if I tell him about a ham sandwich I ate earlier, it should have a point to this conversation. So I'm slowly kind of leading and pacing or pacing and leading. So it's like, okay, we're going to have a very constructive, productive conversation together. And I'm not going to be sitting here wasting any of your time. So rather than said, I respect your time, this call is important to me, I demonstrate that versus talk about it. So do not say.
Okay, that actually triggered a memory. It was over so quickly that I didn't remember it right after we ended the scene. But that moment when you asked me which video was it, it's something I actually ask a lot of people when they come to me and they're like, I heard you on this podcast, or I saw this post. I will ask which post, which podcast episode. But it was so interesting having you ask me the same question because I've never been on the receiving end. And I had this moment of startlement, like for like a brief second. I felt a little put on the spot, but then it made me think immediately right after that is, oh, this guy actually is paying attention. Like he cares. Like he's not just fluff is coming out of his mouth. That was the general sense that I had at that moment.
That's good. So I felt that you were a little startled too, to be honest, because whenever somebody says, oh, I love this book on something, I'm like, oh, which book was that? Then like, yoinks, now I have to be accountable for the things I say. This happens all the time to my friends, right? Friends, it's just how I am. I'm sorry. I live as if what you're saying is important to me. And so this is why I think social situations for me are completely like just, it fries me out. I'm so tired because people are just saying and spewing out nonsensical stuff because they just want to kill the dead air. They want to fill all the gaps in silence. And for me, it's like, if it's not important to say, just be quiet. It's okay if we just stare at each other for a little bit or if we nurse our drink. It's totally okay. And in fact, it's more comfortable for me to do that than to be in constant dialogue, either receiving or sharing information. So when I asked you about that video and you're like, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Now I know. And then of course, the next thing I got to do is say, I wonder if there's a reason why you're sharing that with me. Is it connected to our call today? And again, a little hesitation on your part. And then you got me. Well, basically the strategy here is, the way I look at it is we're on a road and maybe it's 2 or 3 lanes. It's not infinite, maybe 2 lanes. And I have to put up the guardrails so our vehicle, the conversation, doesn't careen off the road. It's not an off-road vehicle. I want to keep it on the road. And it's maybe dangerous to go off to the side. So what I do is when I feel like the conversation is going off-road, off track, I bring it back to on track. And I try to do that in the most gentle way possible. And sometimes I have to do it a little bit more direct. Now, all of this, in case you're picking up on this, is very consent-based conversation. It's very permission-based. May I be able to control the agenda? Can I time box this? Are you okay with if I interrupt you? So I'm getting a lot of little agreements with you. And if you're not okay, then I'll figure out a different way. But when you start to feel this, and hopefully you feel this, what Jewel was talking about earlier in our conversation is sometimes the conversation feels like you're being wrapped up in a warm blanket. And what's happening strategically is a couple different things. Number one is, and I learned this from my family therapist, children feel safe when they know someone's in charge. Because when no one's in charge, they feel really unsafe. And this has been proven throughout my personal life. Every time we go on a quote unquote dangerous adventure, they oftentimes do not run to mom, they just run to dad. Even though sometimes I'm a jerk, because they know commander says go, we are safe. Commander says stop, we stop, we're safe. Commander says stay over here while I check out the danger ahead, because something is dangerous ahead and they feel safe. So in a call, the client is not your child. They can't be talked to in the same commanding voice, but they still need to know this is not your first rodeo. You understand how to talk to prospects like me, and I feel more confident and safe that someone's leading this thing, because clearly if I knew what I was doing, I would not hire you. I would not be on this call. So that's what we do. So I'm asking for your permission to at least to take control of the wheel for a little bit.
You know what it is that I'm thinking through this one sentence interchange between us? Yes, there's permission in your entire demeanor, and it's not permission as in you're submissive. It's more gracious. Like, we're in this space together. Let's do this dance. I'm going to do my best not step on your toes, and I'm going to let you lead where it makes sense. Is it okay if I lead sometimes? And so it's a very respectful acknowledgement, which that's the energy that I think everyone should come to every call with. But there is something a little bit beyond, if you don't mind me sharing like my experience. What made that one sentence where you said something like, I think I know what video you're talking about, or, you know, imposter syndrome. And you said, is that related to why you're coming to the call today? There's a connection to what I just said. So what I find with a lot of people is there's too many abrupt turns in the conversation. So if we think about it like threads, or even like a game of tennis, actually, that might be a little bit better. So in my mind, I'm seeing a conversation like a game of tennis. You hit the ball over there, they hit it back, and you hit it back again. But what happens with a lot of these conversations is, I think most people, had I said, yeah, I saw this video, they would either have fallen down that trap of, oh yeah, you know, I produce a lot of videos. They would have answered my actual question of, how do you come up with these ideas? Oh, you know, I have a content team, or here's my content strategy. I got content pillars, blah, 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 blah. Or they would have been like, yeah, that's great. Let's save that for another time. What brings you to the call today? And that also would have been a little bit abrupt because, again, you would not have acknowledged that I'm such a fan, right? Again, it's a gift. So your turn was like especially smooth there because you had a connection. You echoed a little bit of what I said. You said, I know that video. And then, is there a relation between imposter syndrome and why you're coming to the call? That's what made that so smooth. You were still picking up on the same thread, but still guiding the thread a little bit in a different direction. That was really good.
Do you know who the Wolf of Wall Street is? Jordan Belfort? He tells a story in his sales program that I caught a video somewhere and I was watching it, and he said, I was out to buy a BMW or something. He went to the BMW dealership and he's like, I want to buy that car. And the guy's like, well, let me show you around, show me the features. And he goes, I'm out. So he goes to the Mercedes dealership and goes to the Mercedes dealership and says, I want to buy that car. And the guy's okay, let's do the paperwork. He's like, finally, okay, we're going to do this. And then he made a comment on the photograph and oh, I see your son plays baseball. So he stops doing the paperwork, starts talking about baseball, like, oh yeah, we're in the leagues and we do this, and I'm like a part-time assistant coach. And he goes, I'm done. He just leaves the showroom. Finally goes to a Porsche dealership and says, I want to buy that car. They do the paperwork, he buys the car and leaves. He goes, you don't understand, when somebody's ready to buy, keep the conversation focused and don't go past the sale. So we can get distracted. So the trap I could have fallen down, Jewel, which you kind of highlighted, which is, oh, I love this video. I'm like, oh yeah, you know that video? Yeah, I made that in 2014. I didn't think anybody's going to like it. And you're like, okay. So now it's gone off the rails. I deliberately took the wheel and careened it right off the rails. And now we're going down a 30-degree descent and we don't know what's going on. And it's really bumpy right now. The whole time, I would suspect, depending on who it is, even though they might admit it to you, is, when do we talk about business? When do we talk about sales? When do we talk about solving my problem, which is why I've given you so little of my precious time? And that's a problem. And a lot of people fall down that trap. So I just want to warn some folks.
When I think about why we fall down those traps, you know, some of it is connection based. It's like, oh, we feel really good. Somebody said something great about our content or something that we produced or created. But then if you sit there and you ask yourself, why were you so quick to actually take the bait? It's usually because of some desire to feel like you're worth something, right? To prove your worth. And this is, I think, the fine line. What causes a lot of weird energy on our sales calls or the role plays that we've seen is many of the people we've worked with are depending on that buyer or that prospect to prove their worth to them. And so this is where a lot of the calls, like literally, if you look at your calls, if you have run them through something like Otter or any transcription service, and you look at the percent of time you're talking, if you are talking more than 50% of the time, you are probably in this space. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that I've reviewed their calls, they're actually talking 70, 80, 85% of the time. You're definitely in that space if that's you, if you're talking so friggin' much.
I would suggest people follow the 80-20 rule. For the 80% of the conversation, you should be talking 20% of the time. And towards the 20%, the latter part, you could be talking 80% of the time, because now it's time for you to connect all the dots and let the clients know you've been listening and you've identified a few things for them with them. And it's important that you sort of end the conversation in that place so that they know, like, oh, there was a reason why you asked all these questions. It should be a self-evident to them, but in case they're a little dense or they're not following along because they're overwhelmed with the things that you're talking about, that's very helpful now. So I would caution anybody who's going to spend more than the first 80% of the call talking more than 20% of the time. There's some framing, there's some setting up, but after that, you should just ask a question and shut up. There's no need for you to keep going on, because when your mouth is moving, you're not learning anything. So I said, may I have your permission to set the agenda for the call? This is the first time I'm asking you for permission to lead. And if you said yes, and most people do say yes. In fact, whenever I've asked that question, no one's ever said no. And so now I'm setting up that if I were to interrupt you, or if I'm pushing things along, it's because you told me you literally only have 30 minutes and you have a hard out. That allows me to say, okay, anytime that Jewel pulls this conversation out, I have permission from her to say, okay, I'd love to hear more about that, but I would like to redirect you here because I think we're really close to putting our finger on what the problem is. And you're like, of course. And I can remind you of that. And here's what happens a lot of times if you do this the right way. Jewel told me she has a hard out at 30. People will say that because they don't want to go past the 30-minute mark. But I find that a lot of times when we're really in deep and it's getting real good and juicy, yeah, Chris, you have as much time as you want. And that's a really affirming thing. I will still respect the 30-minute time limit, but to know that she has gone against her own word to say like you have more time means you're definitely in rapport and that she finds value in the conversation. This is a good sign.
I'm smiling because this just happened to me yesterday. This person told me they had a hard out. They only had 40 minutes. And then I looked at the phone. I'm like, wait a minute, it's already like 50 something minutes. I was like, I thought you had to be, going. She's just like, yeah, push the meeting.
That's a positive vote for you. Like literally in the background, they're texting their assistant, whoever, I'm running late, push the meeting by 20 minutes or whatever, because they find this to be very valuable. So the likelihood of you at least being seriously considered for the gig, the job, or whatever it is very, very high. Now, the principles that we're talking about here shouldn't sound foreign to you, because in theory, if you have meaningful relationships in your life with friends, with partners, with colleagues, with lovers or a spouse, then you're already doing this all the time. You're listening intently. You're asking follow-up questions. You're asking for permission. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow. Now, we're using a lot more guidance here because oftentimes in our normal relationships, we have many opportunities to F it up, and that's totally okay. That's just part of the sloppiness of life. But when you're on a new business call, you have to show up and be on point. You have to be the best conversationalist you've ever been. When you put in that kind of context, hopefully right now you're listening to this and thinking to yourself, I've been approaching this sales conversation completely wrong. And if that's the case, I have good news for you, because that means your opportunity to grow is really high. I've said this before, and I really believe this in my heart, which is life would be really boring if I thought I reached the terminal station of whatever it is I wanted to learn. Like people who get a black belt want to get a 2nd degree black belt, a 3rd degree black belt, or some other version, or they incorporate a different martial art, because for me, learning is life. So don't fret, everybody. The fact that you now become aware of some of the things that you're deficient in means that you now have the capacity to learn that thing. And every little thing that you learn and apply towards new business development means that you increase the percentages of you closing a client, hopefully for more money and with less stress.
If I know the audience half as well as I think I do, I think the one phrase you said where you need to be the best conversationalist, you need to be like in that first conversation, probably a lot of people had a moment of freak out right there. And I want to dial it back because I'm like, no. You got to listen to what Chris said after, because it's a freaking exciting time to be you. Think of this like you losing weight at the gym. When's the period you lose the most weight? It's in that beginning phase, because it is so easy to get that lift. There's so much out there, so many low-hanging fruit that if you even grab like 3 of them, you would improve probably by 50%. Think about that phrase. It's an exciting time to be you, because it's so easy to grow where you're at from. And then it only gets better from there. It only gets better, I promise.
The whole point of us slipping into role play was to see if it's necessary for small talk or not, and to see if my ability to move it away from small talk to the heart of the conversation made you feel like it was off-putting to you? Because people argue with me all the time, small talk is necessary. And to a degree it is. There's a way to do it so that you can gently transition from one moment to the next. And now speaking of transitions, it's one of the most important things that I've learned in my life is transitions. So when I create a moving image, I'm trying to avoid that moment when I take you out of the sequence, right? So I create a transition. When I'm raising my children and we're trying to move from activity to activity, like for example, playing with Legos to time to brush your teeth, I'm trying to create a transition so that isn't so jarring. And when I'm in a sales conversation or writing an article, as I talk about one thing and then I want you to think about something else, that transition is really, really important. I'll give you an example because I saw it on my phone early this morning. I saw a post from Alex Hormozy and he wrote, "It's only been less than 1 month since President candidate Trump was shot. There was an attempt made on his life. There's been 2 news cycles for a rather significant event, and now no one is talking about that event anymore." He goes, when something bad happens to you, just give it a beat. No one will remember either. So it was really interesting how he took a political event. I was like, where's Alex going with this? He transitioned it to a business concept that you might be going through some bad stuff. You might have effed up on some gig. Just give it a beat. No one will remember and you'll be okay. So that was a beautiful transition. So when we're on the sales call, Jewel or the prospect may bring up certain things that are, uh-oh, it's veering off track here. I'm going to figure out how to transition back so that the guardrails go up so we're staying on track.
I think that's a really key skill. We've done like so many calls in this summer. Like even before we did the 6-part webinar series that's now up on your YouTube channel, we'd already done like 4 calls before that. So that's crazy if you think about it, like how we got here right now is we've done at least 10 calls on sales like just this year. And having the transition, like being able to smooth the conversation, the flow, is a really valuable skill. And so in my mind, you know, when I go back to the game of tennis, it's like you want to hit the same ball back and forth or you want to end the game. But what happens a lot of the times is you're both hitting separate balls at each other. It's like, what are you doing then? You're not playing a game together. You're just there on the court. And that's when the person starts to feel like their time is wasted. Out of all the skills that we've kind of taken people through on the role plays, which skill would you consider the hardest to master?
There are actually 2 skills because there are 2 sides of one coin. The ability to ask a question that is open-ended yet strategic, and the ability to listen to the response. Because if you can learn how to hear, then you can learn how to ask the next question. So if you ask a really good question, which we can all learn because you can memorize a couple of them that will usually get you through any kind of tough moment. But then your ability to listen is demonstrated by the follow-up question. That's why element number 3 of the 8 elemental skills of conversational selling is evidence-based follow-up. That's number 3 on the list. It's not in any particular order, right? So I need to be able to listen to you. And I want to clarify something for people because they're like, wait. You mean transitions are the skill? Yeah, they're a skill. Well, haven't we done this before, Chris? I'm like, no, you haven't. And here's how I know. Client is talking about a problem, we're getting somewhere, and then you transition to, by the way, you need personal branding. That is not the transition I'm talking about. The transition is get them back on track so they can identify the real problem, which happens to be number 1 on the list. What is the real problem? And I need to keep asking questions till I understand the problem. Then once I understand the problem or the desired outcome that you want, I can move on to the next thing. That's the track that I'm on. What's the problem? What's the challenge? What would this mean for you? And when I figure that stuff out, pretty much you're going to sell yourself to me. You'll say, this sounds wonderful. How do we get started? What does it cost? And then I get to talk about whatever package I may or may not have for you. So the transition isn't to get to the point that you want, but to understand the whole point of the conversation, which is the problem, the challenge, and why you're doing this in the first place.
I'm really glad you're saying this because I'm having an immediate flashback to one of the role plays I did recently. And the person told me she was sitting there thinking, when do I get to tell her about my packages? I'm like, as the buyer, and this is in the debrief after the role play, I was like, as the buyer, when you got to that point, I was like, why is she talking about her packages? I still don't know what I'm getting. What's my problem? Like, what's in my way? Like, you've answered none of the major questions. And yet here you are talking about your packages. I'm like, stop talking. Like, I want to hang up the phone right now.
I just got back from an amazing epic fishing trip that I wish you were there for. I'm often to make fishing analogies to show you the absurdity of what you're doing, okay? Because we're like, in our process is how we do things, and we think, oh, no, this totally makes sense, all right? When you're talking about your packages, your pricing, how it's going to work, the scheduling, the benchmarks, milestones, and all that kind of stuff, it's like you in the boat with the net ready to go. That's you. ready to talk about your offer, right? The problem is our lines aren't in the water. We don't even know if there are fish here, and there's nothing on our line. So if you want to stand like an idiot with the net out at the ready while we're still out in the water, kind of getting to the fishing grounds, then that's on you, because you like to hold things up. It's not until that you actually have a fish on the line, that you've set the hook, that you've played the fish, that means that the fish is tired out and it's saying to you, I'm ready to come in the boat, that then you get the net. And it does so in a very specific way. Salmon point towards the boat when they're tired. When their face is not pointing towards the boat, they're not ready to be brought in. And that's you again with that net trying to swat at that fish. And this is how more fish are lost. And I got to witness some of that with my friends. The fish was still splashing the water, trying to make a run. Somebody gets the net out, and then they fumble it once again, and the fish is gone. That's you, too eager, too desperate. And I tell people this because, and this men are more guilty of this in the fishing boat, and then you can draw its own conclusion in the real world, is like, I'm a big, strong, muscular man. I have long arms. I'm athletic. I used to play college ball, right? Something like that. So when this fish is near, I'm not going to risk losing the fish for my fishing partner. So they sit there and they swat at it. What they don't realize is when that net comes into contact with water, two things happens. It freaks the fish out because it's seeing something come in and knows it's a predator. It's going to freak the F out. Number two, what you don't realize is when the net hits the water, there's friction and resistance. It's not swatting in the middle there. So you hit it with a certain velocity and immediately, like, you know how like people dive? There's a splash and it slows the thing down. So people don't anticipate that. They keep telling themselves, I'm going to bring this fish in. And what happens more often than not, fish is gone, heartbreak. All you get to have is to tell the story at camp about the one that got away, that you almost bagged a fish. And this happens all the time.
So what's the answer then?
To the fishing part or to the sales conversation?
I mean, the fishing or the sales,
okay.
You're using this as a metaphor, man.
Yeah, I am. Right. So you play the fish is tired, and at some point it says, you are the better person, I'm ready to come in the boat. When it points its face towards the boat, it is ready. At this point, it's not going anywhere, and you got a good hook in there, and you lower the net, and you swoop it out, one move. And when you do it the right way, it's actually pretty easy, and it's almost foolproof. I've missed a couple of times, but very rarely have I ever caused someone to lose their fish, because I'm patient. I'm like, you got this, I believe in you. I'm not putting this net in until I know that the fish is ready. So the person who's fishing, sometimes they start to panic, like, net it right now. You know, they're not playing the game. And they don't have the confidence that the tension that they created will keep the fish on the line. So now in real life, when you're talking to the prospect, by asking them questions, helping them to understand the problem, the challenges stand in their way, you've hooked the fish, you're bringing them in, and you play it nice and slow. Every time you ask an evidence-based follow-up question, and you get them to clarify things, and you're getting closer to a problem, it's them swimming towards the boat. When they point their nose to the boat is when they say, this sounds exciting. I think you've nailed it. What is next? How do we proceed? What does this cost? What are the milestones? Then you know it's time to get out the net. Now, this is where people mess up. People will mess up this part all the time. They're ready to buy. And what they do is they let more line out. They're like, no, I want to play this game a little bit longer. And you fumble it once again. When the prospect is in a position to say, I'm ready to buy, you stop fishing, you get the net out.
So two things. In this image with the fish, and they point their face towards the boat, right? They point their face towards you. I had this feeling of, the fish is tired. They're like, give me a place to rest. I'm ready for this struggle to be over. Let me come home. Like, give me a soft landing place. So I think number one, that's the difference. It kind of reminds me of something you said like a long time ago, where we don't realize, because you're saying, especially the men on this fishing trip, let me get the net out and it's a little too soon and I don't want to risk losing this fish. That's the scarcity mindset. So we don't realize that the people out there have fewer options to buy from than the reverse. You have an infinite number of clients out there who you could work with, but you're coming at this with this energy of scarcity, like this desperation. I can't let this fish get away. And that's actually what kind of kills the whole thing. And it's like, aren't you tired? Let me solve the problem for you. Come home.
When you described it as, I'm ready for the struggle to be over, I think that's an excellent way to describe what the client or the prospect feels. in which I've been having an SEO problem, I'm having a conversion problem, having a design problem or a branding problem, a marketing and messaging problem. I don't want to struggle anymore. And if you're the person, I'll swim right to the boat. And believe it or not, unless it's a really, really big gig, 10 minutes is all you need. You don't need 30 minutes to talk to them. It's a 10-minute fight, if you will. Now, the way we end the struggle is we bonk the fish in the head and bleed its gill, but that's a different story. I know that's kind of too much for people to hear.
Why you gotta go there? Why did you
well,
even
because
mention this?
when you're like, Jewel, you're killing the fish. And I just want to be there to keep it real.
So typical Chris right here. Got to get all graphic, violent. Oh my God. That second part of what you said, that people will make the mistake when the buyer is ready, right? But then you let out more line. I have had people tell me that they were like, I don't know what the F happened. Like they were the buyer. And they're like, just shut up and stop talking. Like I'm ready to give you my money. And the person kept asking more questions and kept putting them through more hoops. And they actually unsold themselves. I'm like, oh no, what happened?
It happens a lot, actually. When they're ready to come in, and this has happened in professional places by professional people I've employed before, where they go past a sale. Because if the whole point of the conversation is, do you have a problem I can solve? Is it an important and urgent problem that needs solving? And if I'm the right person, then that's what we got to. When we get to that point, we should not be inventing new problems to talk about. We got exactly what we thought we came to this call for. And believe it or not, and I don't want to get into it, but people go past the sale all the time. All the time. Now, in your real life, this happens like when your child is developing an argument or a debate and all the reasons why you should let them do something that they think that you won't let them do, like go to a party or buy something expensive. And they're building up in their mind how this conversation is supposed to go. And they come to you, it's like, Dad, can I buy this thing? It's and it's cost for whatever, $400. I'm like, yeah, but I really need this thing. And they keep talking and talking. I said, I already said, yeah. And they keep talking and talking. I said, if you say one more thing, I'll change my mind. Now, that's with my own child, a person I brought into this world, a person I love more than my own life, that I'm willing to say that to. Imagine if it was a prospect and you just kept doing that. They're like, you know what? It's going to be miserable working with you. Never mind. And this happens. You're like, this will never happen to me. I guarantee you've done this. If not you, someone on your team has done this. When people say to me, I want to book you for the speaking gig, we're going to pay you whatever you want. I don't ask them like, what are the terms? It's like they already said, we'll do whatever you want. The rest of it can be negotiated. But right now, it's about taking the deposit and booking the gig. And that's what you're trying to do, everybody.
I'm laughing though, because I had a call this morning with someone where he was like trying to convince me to do something. And I was like, okay. And then he kept explaining. And I was like, dude, I already did it. Did you not see? Like I literally implemented it right in front of you because the screen was shared. It's like, stop talking for the love of God. So there's something that I shared in a role play practice with somebody recently. I was like, you got to be careful. Like, watch out for that tendency to over-explain and to keep talking. It's like, why are you doing that? And in today's day and age, this is not the same as like when you and I were growing up like 30 years ago. We are inundated with so much communication and so much media on so many different platforms and channels. We have Facebook, we have TikTok, there's LinkedIn. You get like 1,000 emails per week. We don't realize that the longer and longer we keep speaking at somebody, they just tune us out. So it's likely they're not even listening to you. And sometimes, like, this is going to sound awful for me, but I had a coaching client. Sometimes when he just goes off and I've already given him like the answer and he's just keeps talking. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. I've tuned him out. And he was like, yeah, like, well, what do you think? And I was like, I don't know, dude, I stopped listening. And he just busts out laughing. Keep that in mind.
There was a point 3 that I think you wanted to make on this. The point was, Chris, I didn't realize how an amazing fisherman you are. That was the third field late. Jewel, no joke. What are you talking about? Why are you laughing?
Oh my Lord. Yeah, well, at least on your trip, you're the expert fisherman for sure. Don't
say that. That's insulting to me. At least on your trip. How dare you dismiss my angling abilities?
Oh my God. No. For real though. If any of you ever go on this fishing trip with Chris, and I'm probably going to be on this Olay's fishing trip next year.
What do you mean probably?
Yeah, okay.
When?
He's going hardcore here. He's just like Mark Manson. There's no trying, just do. Yes, I will be at the fishing trip next year. But if you come to this fishing trip, just be prepared. Chris is like the Wikipedia of how to fish on this trip. He will tell you all the little tricks and the nooks and crannies, and he'll tell you to bring like a throwaway nail clipper so you can have a quick way to release the line. So many tips. It's going to be fun.
You know what? The people who listen to me, they thank me. I got the clipper. It's ready to go. And they were able to cut the line so fast versus go racing in the box for a knife. So here's the thing. And maybe this is kind of where we end the conversation here today, which is there are people who have experienced the things that you want to experience, who've done the things that you hope to do one day. So when you have an experienced guide, whether in fishing or in sales or in branding or identity design, pick someone and then trust them and just follow the process. The theme for next year, and we talked about this, is I'm going to make sure it's for everybody. It's going to say trust and believe. It's something that our friend Phyllis Strider loves to say all the time. Trust and believe. Trust and believe. Trust in the process and believe in yourself and your skills. If you do those two things, you're going to have a lot of success in life. And I want to memorialize the lessons that we learn in the water, in the world, to apply back when we're on land and doing our thing. Trust in the process and believe in yourself.
I'm going to throw something in here is at least trust us in the process. At least trust Chris. And if you can at least come to the experience, whatever that experience is, you will have your life changed. You will learn to trust and believe in yourself coming to the event. And I know that sounds salesy, but here's the thing. If you look back over your life now and you see where you're at right now, everything you have done so far has put you where you're at now. So isn't it time to do something different? And I have been there. I've been there 4 years ago. I felt like I could never make it as a coach. And now with the contracts that I'm landing today, sometimes I look back and I'm like, holy moly, how did this happen? This is insane. A lot of it has been thanks to the guidance I've received from you, the guidance I've sought out from mentor coaches, the hard work I've put into studying coaching and studying how to talk to people, understanding people. But there was a point where I tried to run away from all of this. I was like, oh, SEO is easier. Let me run back to what I know and what I'm comfortable with because that's easier. And everything you're experiencing is totally normal. That is what we do as people. It is not natural to go out and seek to do the things that are hard, the things that push you outside of your comfort zone. So if this seems hard or difficult or risky in any way, just try to trust at least in Chris or whoever that guide is for you at that moment. Trust, show up, and just let it happen. And before you know it, you will see things will change. Like today, when I look at the stuff, like I was just telling Chris, I can't believe I woke up yesterday for a call that was at 6 a.m. Even 2 years ago, I would have been like, hell no. I'm never going to that. I can't sign up for that. If you told me that I would start to be able to work out and maybe be able to do a pull-up, I would have laughed in your face. I was that kid with the wet noodle arms in high school. Like they tell you to do the arm hang, they lift you into position, and as soon as they let go, I fall like a sack of potatoes. It's like, that was me, and yet now I'm almost there. It's incredible if you just try it out. So just try it.
I would say this. Back in 1995, when I started my company, the kinds of resources that were available then pale in comparison to what's available to you today. This is kind of pre-internet 1995. It's pre-Google, pre-YouTube, pre-webinars, pre-Zoom and all this kind of stuff. And so I had to struggle in the best way that I could and reach out to people the old-fashioned way. Pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, how are you doing your sales thing? Can you help me? And I struggled to find someone who knew what they were talking about, who's willing to spend time sharing with me what it is they knew how to do. So unfortunately, no one was able to do it. And so I just struggled through that whole process. And I keep thinking back, how much work and money did I leave on the table? And something I learned from a mentor a while back is he said that when the iron is hot, you must strike because good times don't last forever. And I didn't really heed his warning because we're in the boom time in the early 2000s, making just hand over fist, just tripping on piles of money. The most profitable I've ever been in my life, running like jobs that were 85% net profit margins, which is bananas. And I assumed these times would last forever, and they didn't. So I keep looking back, and I don't live with regret. First of all, it's a useless emotion, but I wonder sometimes if I had a mentor, a coach, a guide to teach me, like if I found Kier 5 years before I found him at the beginning of my business life, I would have just cleaned house. I might have been the kingpin of motion design in LA. Who knows? The only reason why I bring that up to you is you're in a different time now. You have access almost to too much information. Amazon is available now. So there's books and resources, all these things. And I now know what the new problem is. It's overwhelming. There's just too much. It's the paradox of choice. You don't know which way to go. And so I'm not telling you that I'm your guide to this thing. Just find somebody. Find someone that you resonate with, their style of speaking, and if they've been around for a minute. And if they haven't, do your due diligence, because a lot of you get taken advantage of. Now, for a lot of people, my style of selling, this permission consent base that's led with generosity, that's low pressure, that's designed for introverts just like myself, it might not be the right program for you. And I totally get that. If it's not, I'm not your guy. But I've made the intention this year to work on my teaching skills. I've hired teaching coaches. I've consulted with improv teachers to show me new ways of teaching things so that you get to experience it versus listening to it. And those are two very different things. And I'm very guilty of this. I take pride in my ability to disseminate information, to take complex concepts and distill them down to simple, easy to follow things. But I've not been as good as I want to be in the transference of those skills from me to you. And that's the intention behind all these workshops that I'm doing right now, because I'm going to get it to a point when almost every single person who's willing to do the work shows up and is drastically improved from where they started from. Maybe they're not a sales ninja on day one, but they're vastly improved. And I know you're sitting there thinking, well, Chris, show us the receipts. And we have plenty of anecdotal evidence, but there's two that I want to call attention to. And so, Jewel, if you don't mind, can you share some of those with us?
Yes, of course, Chris. So there is somebody who texted me literally just this past Tuesday, so 2 days ago. And it was amazing because she said, so I've had 2 sales calls since learning from you guys, and one ended up at $60,000. I got the sale. It's a $60,000 annual contract. And I was like, holy shizzles, this is crazy. It's so cool. And then somebody else unexpectedly sent me a message. And this is me. It's not like I go around asking people like, hey, are your sales up? But this next person who was in the pro group, she said right after she did the role play with me, she actually landed a 5K client, like the week after. And I thought, this is so great. So there's definitely a difference. I think maybe 3 years ago when I first told you, I said, Chris, I have a hard time learning from you. You're so far ahead. It's like I can't grasp what you're saying. Like what you're saying sounds good, but I cannot grasp it. Like it's hard for me to actually put that into practice. And now I think what we're seeing is every time we do these role plays or these sales calls, I get flooded with all these messages of people saying, this one thing you shared, I did that and it changed everything. So we're getting messages every single time we have a call. And then I forward the messages on to Chris.
And then I complain, why don't they ever send them to me?
It's you, man. You're too scary. It's the scary Asian dad.
Share with me your success. I can hear the complaints, but I love hearing about your success, everybody. I get to hear about those more in person and in my DMs, and I'm not so good at screen capturing them. So I just like, oh, it'll be here when I need to find it. And then 3,000 messages later, I'm like, who said what? I can't find any of this anymore. Okay. Now I do know this anecdotally. The people who watch a lot of our free videos on YouTube comment, like literally, this changed my business, closed this size job. I'm doing $200,000 a year. You help me quit my job. You give me confidence and all that kind of stuff. Here's the summation of all of this. Having money is good. No doubt about it. But being affirmed in the belief that you're a good person, that you bring value to the world, and that the decision that you made to be this kind of gifted misfit, a term that Brian Collins shared with me, it is affirming. It's a boost of confidence, and you need some vitamin C. You need more confidence. And when you can do this and the stress starts to like fall away from your body, like you're shedding that skin, that's the most important thing. Because when you start to have that belief inside of you, this mindset that I can win any job, it's just a question of if this is a good fit for both the client and for myself, that's life-changing. So yeah, the money will come, but the money is a byproduct of your confidence going up and your ability to naturally have really great conversations. I will share this one thing. There's a gentleman, his name is Noro, and he attended our workshop. He attended the half-day workshop in LA. I saw him in Las Vegas at a conference. He goes, Chris, the things that you teach go way beyond sales. I'm like, yeah? What do you mean? He goes, my relationships, my communications has improved so much because what you're talking about is how to be a better conversationalist, and I'm using it in everything. And that to me is like music to my ears, and it just warms my heart to be able to hear stuff like that. And if this is something you want to do, you have an opportunity. I don't do these workshops all the time. October 12th, Miami, we're doing a full day workshop, myself and Carlos, where the gang's getting back together. And instead of rushing through it for half a day, you're going to get a full day. We're applying the learnings that we got from the last time, plus what I've been coached on So new exercises, new ways to experience this. And if that wasn't good enough, Jewel and I are putting together a workshop in London, October 29th and 30th. So it's a 2-day workshop, 1 day full deep dive with me. And then the second day, a lot of like follow up and like, let's pull apart these exercises and really give you more hands-on experience and more coaching so that you can walk away having been transformed. Now, I know it's crazy, but we're limiting these workshops to 30 people. We've already sold a third of the tickets for London. So don't hesitate, everybody. Save your spot. I'll put the link in the description below. So check that out and it'll appear somewhere on the screen. Now, I know this about entrepreneurs. They know that to make money, you spend money. And I'm always learning every day from what I consider thoroughbred entrepreneurs, people like Neil Dingra, people like Jasmine Star. The amount of money they spend on personal development is insane to me. And I keep asking myself, am I an entrepreneur? Do I put money at risk for gain? And the crazy thing about these entrepreneurs is no matter what they spend, they always get a multitude ROI back on what they spend. So if you're so inclined, go to the Miami workshop and then book a ticket and fly to London. We'll see you there. So you have 2.5 days or 3 days with us. And to me, that would be transformative. And you can do that.
When you were sharing that story of how it's like this is affecting everything in his life, and I'm like, it goes back to that thing you were saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So you learn what you think are just sales skills or what you think are just business skills, and it's actually a cascading, like a domino effect. So you start at any point in your life and there is stuff to gain no matter what. So you talking about like these entrepreneurs investing in themselves, I'm like, of course. It's like I'm the person who shows up and I'm going to get what I came for. And it may not necessarily be what I thought I was going to get, but I'm going to get what I came for and more. And it's that at more part. It's beyond what I ever expected. If you look at me 3 years ago, I don't even know how much you remember me of 3 years ago, but you and I have known each other for about 3 years. And I remember being really stuck in this place of, I don't believe in myself. I don't believe I can make it as a coach. Who's going to listen to me? And the crazy thing is like, even when people were saying yes to me on my sales calls, I would then self-sabotage. I would take like 2 weeks to send them an invoice and a contract. And it's like, who does that? It's like bananas. So the stuff you will do because you don't believe in yourself, it blows my mind. I'm like, you know what? Why don't you try letting life be easy? The fish are tired, man. They're ready for the struggle to be over.